So, have you ever confessed to something that you did? Yes, I stole the jar of marmalade from the store when I was 9 years old. Don't worry about that example, but some more common examples could include yes, I have lied to you before. Yes, I confess that I've been lazy in doing my daily rituals or daily offerings. Or, yes, person who I really care about in my life, I am here before you. I've hurt you. I ask for your forgiveness. Yes, I want to be better. Okay, fair enough. Think about those examples, but here's another question for you. Have you ever confessed to something that you did not do? Like, for example, just confessing to all of the sins, let's say all of them. Well, in grimoire magic, confession is actually a really vital part of any magical ritual. But why and how? And I mean, grimoires like the Key of Solomon, for example, one of the best documented and earliest Solomonic grimoires, has you confessing to all of the seven deadly sins, to breaking all of the Ten Commandments effectively, even confessing to depriving the dead of burial. So this kind of begs the question, unless you're the worst person on the planet, what does it actually mean to confess profusely in a magical context? What's going on here? How does confession restore our balance and our harmony with nature and with spirits? What does redemption and even the concept of moving forward actually mean in an esoteric paradigm? Well, I confess to you right now, my dear listeners and Glitch Bottle patrons, that is what we are exploring in this episode: confession in a grimoiric context. And if you enjoy the content here on Glitch Bottle, please consider subscribing and checking out my other videos and podcast episodes with scholars, magical practitioners, and others. By the way, Glitch Bottle has no advertisements and no sponsors. It literally only depends on you, on listener support. So if you'd like to consider becoming a patron, a supporter of the podcast, please consider joining the Glitch Bottle Caravan at patreon.com/glitchbottle. I love my patrons. Without them, the podcast would not be possible. Plus, they're all super amazing, have excellent questions for guests, and get to enjoy extra perks as well. So definitely consider that. But in the meantime, let's now turn to confession, demons, and why declaring one's transgressions is actually critical in a magical context. I'm Alexander Eth, and welcome to Glitch Bottle, where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. Let's get into it. So I grew up Roman Catholic, and I remember just dreading the first time that I had to confess my sins to a priest, also known as going through the sacrament of reconciliation. But I got through it. I went in there. I confessed how one time I hurt my sister's feelings, how last week I said a swear word, which really was something I heard my parents saying, and I was just repeating innocently, but let's not get into too much context here. Let's not get too granular. I also confessed to maybe how I allegedly stole the jar of marmalade, and I promised never to do any of it again. I confessed all of my sins, I received penance and absolution, and I was so glad to be out of there. I was done with that practice of confessing sins forever. And I thought I was done. But no, as they have a tendency to do, as I'm sure many of you know, listeners and patrons, the grimoires, they pull you back in.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Indeed, they do pull you back in. And many of these grimoires or these books of magic require that you, as the operator, confess your sins to God, or perhaps confess your sins to other assistants or participants in a ritual, to a priest, and so much more. And this kind of begs the question, so what's going on with confession and repentance in a magical context? I mean, we get that it's somehow important, but how can we also understand why it's important? And how can we also free confession from the misconception that it's simply some kind of religious holdover from an earlier time that we don't need anymore? In fact, that's a great place to start. Let's start right here. Some people out there might say, This confession stuff, it's a church-based control mechanism. It was socially constructed to keep people in line, and that's it. It's the 21st century. I don't need to do any of that stuff now. I don't need to go to confession. If I want to contact spirits in a Solomonic grimoire context, for example, I can do just fine without some institutional guilt machine telling me that I need to confess, right? That might be some of the opinions that might be out there. And in fact, the same person might also say other things along the lines of, well, confession is just for people who do angel magic. Confession is for people who maybe operate in heavily Christianized magical systems, for example. And the same person might say, people who know a lot about Goetia or Goetia and the history of chthonic ancient systems of magic, people like Jake Stratton Kent, for example, who's been a guest on the podcast, they probably don't even consider that confession is even necessary, right? Well, actually, hypothetical person, you would actually be incorrect. In fact, Jake Stratton Kent, someone who literally has said, "I don't do angels," unquote, says in his wonderful tome, The Sworn and Secret Grimoire, quote, "It is a frequent modern error to omit this stage or to reduce it to a mere statement of intent without the moral or spiritual implications of either an oath or a confession. It's altogether noteworthy that an amoral magician like Aleister Crowley makes no such mistake. In the course of his discussion, he goes so far as to enjoin prostration, a rare exemption to his firm injunctions against even kneeling. The confession is and always has been an indispensable aspect of Goetic ritual. Without it, the magician, or perhaps more clearly the conjurer, is almost bound to fail or to be deceived." As Jake so eloquently says, we've established that confession is very important magically, and it's also important well outside the boundaries, the circumference of religious institutions. But you might ask, okay, but do I really have to confess things that I didn't do? For example, if I'm practicing the Key of Solomon, you might say that seems silly, it's kind of a bit extra, and I'd rather not vocalize committing some kind of homicide when Alexa or other people are listening. And so I'd rather not roll the dice, for example, that the authorities randomly show up. I really don't want to do that. Well, it's okay. Take a deep breath and you and I take a journey back to that confession in the Key of Solomon, where you are confessing to all kinds of things. You are confessing to homicide, idleness, gluttony, greed, debauchery, sacrilege, and literally, quote, "sins which I have committed in all of my senses, by sight, by hearing, by taste, by smell, and by touch, in every way that human weakness can offend the Creator," unquote. So, unless you truly are someone who's done all of these things, what is going on here? Well, magician and author Aaron Leach explains about this special Key of Solomon confession and its ancient roots in his book, Secrets of the Magical Grimoires, saying, quote, "A colleague of mine once termed it a reverse negative confession. The real negative confession appears in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where the soul being judged is accused of a long list of sins, each of which must be verbally denied by the soul. Our Solomonic example above shows us a positive confession. The master admits to every conceivable sin in order to catch any sin of which he may not be aware or would otherwise be willing to admit." Okay, so this confession is kind of a catch-all. It's like extra insurance just in case you've missed anything. So it probably includes the marmalade jar and literally any other thing that you could think of. But why is confession in general in magic so important? And why is it important to confess things that you might not have done? Well, in Solomonic ritual magic, when a magician, for example, steps inside a consecrated circle, the first thing that they do is they connect to the divine as a primary source of protection. This is known in the system that Dr. Stephen Skinner talks about as the first step of the Solomonic method, which in Latin is known as consecratio Dei. Dr. Stephen Skinner explains this step, consecratio Dei, that, quote, On the day of the ceremony, after a schedule of fasting, abstaining, praying, and purifying, the magician opens with prayers to God, looking in the first instance for support and protection from the highest source possible. John Dee prefaced his actions with spirits with long and sometimes very tedious prayers. However, this is a necessary first line of defense. The seven penitential psalms are often recommended for use here. Okay, so that gives kind of a broad sense of what it means to connect to the divine, consecratio Dei. But when it comes to confession, there's another critical element, which is that in its broadest sense, all ritual magic, all grimoiric, Solomonic magic is essentially based when a magician and a spiritual entity engage together in order to reach mutually agreed upon terms that result in a specific change in reality. And of course, this can take a menagerie of different forms. And these mutually agreed upon terms, if we think of it that way, thought of in another way, could be considered covenants, which is a heavier word, a weightier word. And covenants need to be upheld by both parties involved, or all parties involved, in order for them to be effective. Magician John R. King explains it this way in his book, The Faculty of Abrak, saying, quote, "The art of calling upon spirits is founded on the principle of covenants. The magician and the spirit are each in their own way beholden to greater obligations than they owe to each other. It is through these obligations that there is some common ground between the magician and the spirits, some authority under which both can interact. This is not some overlord deity who will enforce what the magician desires, but the realities of existence to which all things are bound." Unquote. So again, this is a very magical, practical aspect to confession because in this sense, confession actually has a restorative power. It restores the covenants between us humans and the divine and the spiritual entities that we're engaging with. And this actual act of restoration effectively creates the space that allows these mutually agreed upon terms to become possible in the first place. And so we've been talking a lot about this importance of confession from a celestial perspective. The divine pouring over us and what confession does to repair covenants. But there is also a darker, more sublunar aspect to all of this behind confession. Dr. Stephen Skinner articulates this when he says, along with David Rankin in the Key of Solomon, the veritable Key of Solomon book that they presented together, when he says, quote, "Of course, the true reason for these confessions is not so much religious as to prevent the spirits from obtaining any leverage through the faults of the practitioner." Now, I remember the first time that I read this years ago, and I thought, wait a second, what? By confession, you can actually prevent demonic or hostile spirits from using what you confess as leverage? Is that right? And yeah, this ties actually directly into the theme of healing and restoring covenants. And I just remember being blown away by that. Even the confession in the Key of Solomon itself says, in its own lofty way, that confession can deprive demonic entities or infernal or hostile entities of power by saying, quote, "O ye holy angels, and ye children of God, in your presence I publish my sins, so that mine enemy may have no advantage over me, and may not be able to reproach me at the last day, that he may not be able to say that I have concealed my sins, and that I be not then accused in the presence of the Lord, but on the contrary, that on my account there may be joy in heaven, as over the just who have confessed their sins in thy presence." I just remember being blown away when I heard this because it's such an interesting and subtle point. And one of the other fascinating facets of this is in the grimoire context in the greater Mediterranean area and throughout history, confession has very deep roots in Jewish communities and practices and Islamic practices as well. And the concept in confession that it somehow deprives infernal or hostile spirits from gaining leverage over people also has very deep roots in Catholic exorcism rites and procedures. So, as an example, here is a clip from Adam Bly, who is a Catholic Church decreed expert on religious demonology and exorcism. And Adam Bly works with priests in the exorcism community, which sounds a bit interesting to say, but there must be an exorcism community amongst priests. And Adam shares here about the really interesting demon limiting power of the sacrament of confession when a priest is right in the middle of an exorcism.
By the way, at exorcisms, the devil is not allowed to bring up sins that have been covered over with the sacrament of confession and removed and absolved. Some people say he can't even remember them. They're wiped from his memory. But we have seen him try to bring up a sin that's been confessed, and all the priest has to do is say, that's been confessed, it's off the table. The demon immediately shuts its mouth and moves on to the next thing. They know the sacrament of confession is binding under God's rules.
Though there are subtleties here and there are different emphases between religious institutions and magic, and even though there are some things that I might disagree with Adam Bly on, I think that Bly's perspective is really important here because even though the church represents kind of a religious approach to exorcism, and the exorcism procedures involve removing spirits from bodies, possessed bodies, instead of conjuring spirits before a consecrated circle or into another location, both magicians and priests recognize the power of confession to removing the potential leverage that infernal spirits might have during a magical operation, or in the religious context, in your life in general. However, this is a really interesting crossover or commonality between magic and religion. The fact that when it comes to exorcisms, or in the Middle Ages, the term was closely used with conjuration or the term invocation. So, in fact, some grimoires, and I'm thinking specifically right now of CLM 849, the Munich Manual, the Necromancer's Handbook of the 15th century, which the great Dr. Kickheffer talks about in his book Forbidden Rites. These grimoires actually use many of these words. I exorcise you, I invoke you, I conjure you, all in the same sentence. And this actually kind of goes to something important, as I see it, that your personal state matters when engaging in magic. It matters. And even though you might think you can't just go to a priest or someone else who is holy to just bless all of your magical implements, consecrate everything for me, do all these masses, perform all these masses over the implements, and then I can just walk into a consecrated circle without any purification, without any confession or introspection, and expect to get results. In the grimoire context, historically, that's definitely not the case. And what's so fascinating here is Roman Catholic priests, who are exorcists in today's day and age, also follow this in terms of confession and self-purification, and that confession is actually needed before an exorcism. For example, here is a clip from priest and exorcist Father Vincent Lampert explaining a little bit more.
The personal charism of the priest is even more important. You know, if I'm not in a state of grace and I'm trying to do an exorcism, nothing good is going to come from that. You know, ex opere operato, meaning when a priest celebrates the sacraments, they're always efficacious, even if the priest
is unbelieving or sinful.
Yes, but that's not the case in an exorcism. So the charism of the priest does matter in an exorcism, which is why if I'm going to do an exorcism, I will prepare myself. I will go to confession, spend time in prayer, celebrate Mass. So I really want to lay it all out before God, so to speak, so that the devil doesn't have anything to attack me with during an exorcism.
So that the devil doesn't have anything to attack me with during an exorcism. I think that's a really interesting concept, and it actually helps establish that confession really does have these deep roots that stretch way back into the mists of history, and that also confession has a magical application. It's not tethered to just religious institutions, because it actually has a very explicit magical function. And that is that confession really enhances the authority of the magician while preventing spirits from using sins or transgressions or things that were not vocalized or confessed against us in rituals. But what if you just say, I mean, I'm sure there might be people out there saying, yeah, that's great. I just don't care about any of that. And confession makes me a little uncomfortable, and even confessing alone to the divine by myself before a ritual. So I'm just not going to do the ritual anyways. Well, as Jake Stratton Kent says, that can be a modern misstep. And as John R. King says, purification also effectively is so valuable because it tells the spirits, I keep my word, I keep my oath, and you are bound to do the same in ritual. There's a reciprocation, a reciprocity there. John R. King says, quote, where the magician has violated some essential principle of success, security, or whatever is desired as an objective, the spirit will be in that respect diminished in ability. In every way that the magician breaks the code of his own conscience, the spirit need not respect that part of the magician or any request arising from it. In order to remedy that situation, the magician undergoes purification rituals to find a new balance and a fresh outlook. Now, of course, let me say here that when it comes to confession, it's a weighty subject, and one should only confess in a magical sense when they are ready and when they're comfortable. And that is whether it's going to confession with a religious figure or confessing by yourself before a ritual or when conducting a ritual with others, as many grimoires talk about. You have to be comfortable, and it has to be the right time for you. You should do what you feel is right when you feel it's appropriate. And this is absolutely different for each person. And confession to fulfill a magical requirement, all the things that we've been talking about, that is absolutely one powerful reason to engage in the practice of confession. But that's only one part of the picture. That's only one piece of the pie. That's only one side of the coin. That's only one stick of the incense. That's only one chunk of the marmalade. Yeah, you get the point. I'm sorry. But the other equally important side of this is, okay, confession is important. I get that. But how do we move forward magically and otherwise with redemption, with forgiveness, with reclaiming our own energy that we've lost via self-forgiveness and practicing that and reclaiming energy, not just psychologically, but magically as well and ritualistically? Well, for me, one of the best voices here is magical practitioner and author Aidan Wachter, whose books 6 Ways and Weaving Fate, they're incredible. Not enough can be said about them, and they offer very powerful ways to engage directly with what Aidan calls the field. And this includes a reclaiming rite that allows us to effectively take back the energy that rightfully belongs to us, but it might have been trapped or separated from us for various reasons. So here is a clip from Aidan on Glitch Bottle Podcast, episode number 60, sharing about the reclaiming rite itself.
And so the reclaiming rite is a process where we forgive ourselves our failures as a ritual practice, not as a psychological practice, so that we can then move forward, right? So again, we're not stuck in that past point because we can't do a lot to change that past point. We can change some of its effects, which is a different thing, but which is really what we're trying to do here. So if we forgive ourselves those failures, those kind of sins of omissions or commissions that we did, that frees up some energy that we didn't have before. And then in that same kind of ritual process, we call back all of our power that we've lost or given away or that was taken from us.
There is so much power in forgiving ourselves, in declaring our, as Aidan Wachter says, quote, sins of omissions and commissions, and in reclaiming that energy. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And there are so many guests who have discussed similar themes on the Glitch Bottle podcast. And one person who comes to mind, of course, is esoteric author, occultist, and magical teacher Josephine McCarthy, who always urges us to pay attention and also urges us not to wait until the perfect time to begin magic, because that time is never going to arrive if we just wait for it. Instead, here's a clip from Josephine in episode number 48 on Glitch Bottle, sharing about the importance of not avoiding mistakes, but of embracing them.
You make your own decisions, you make your choices, you live with them, you learn from them. You learn just as much from doing the wrong things as you do from doing the right things. Your mistakes are vital. Making mistakes and recognizing that you've made a mistake and seeing the consequences of that mistake and standing up to those consequences and riding them out for as long as it takes is the best training in magic you can get.
Very powerful words from Josephine. And it seems to me, listeners and patrons, I don't know about you, but everyone who's been kind of sharing about this in one way or another is that there's this theme that magically confession and taking responsibility for one's own actions goes hand in hand with the other side of the coin, with forgiving oneself and also reclaiming energy and learning from mistakes. It's so amazing because in a grimoire or in a magical sense, confession really is a vital step in being able to have a successful engagement with spirits. And in another sense, completely, confession it's one part of a much larger process of learning from mistakes, of growing and moving forward into new areas of esoteric engagement. So 3 questions that I would absolutely love to hear from Glitch Bottle patrons, of course, and listeners are these. Do you practice some sort of confession procedure or process in magic? And what is it? Also, how do you confess? Is there a specific cadence, a specific flow? I think that would be really interesting to hear from listeners on. And also, what are some of the misconceptions that maybe you had before engaging in confession and then after the act of confession? Would love to hear that. And I want to thank you. Thank you so much for watching. You can always check out the links below for full interviews and all of the references that we've had in the video today, and also links to support Glitch Bottle. I cannot tell you how incredibly thankful I am for supporters of the podcast on patreon.com/glitchbottle. I mean, producing a quality podcast and also keeping episodes free here on YouTube and elsewhere, it is expensive. And so your support really does make a huge difference. Plus, Glitch Bottle patrons not only enjoy extra perks on Patreon, but every single patron's questions for the guests are amazing. Their thoughts, their insights, getting to chat with patrons, getting to know them. I am truly thankful for every single supporter on Patreon. And so if you'd like to consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, I would absolutely be honored. And as always, this is Alexander Eth reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.